what I'd quite like to do, the reason why I wanted to do this topic and have this conversation is in my role, I'm the landlord effectively. I represent the landlord, and actually it came up in one of the presentations earlier there with Legal and General. And we need to change, we need to adapt, and we're the first to admit that. So I want to share some of the ideas we're working on, and there's a few corporate occupiers here, and I want to challenge. I want to give enough questions at the end, one-to-one afterwards. The reason I've come here is to make sure I'm really clear what the future is, what we need to be doing. So this is just a flavour, really. My background, and just a bit of set the scene. So as Liz said, I've been in facilities management. I suppose you would call that my background, if you like. I worked for Mighty for 7.5 years. And I'm not really sure how I ended up in this job in some ways. I love it, it's brilliant. I'm responsible for about 785 properties. Goes up and down every day because we buy and sell stuff. And very much my role is a leadership role in real estate in terms of how we change. And my calculation, around 2,000 people working in our buildings every day. We've got shopping centres, multi-let offices. We own about 500 industrial parks across the UK. And occupiers 4,500 different organisations. So it's a huge challenge to try and make a very old school business relevant, which I'll come on to in a second. But that's my background. I feel very privileged to do the job I do, and I feel a lot of responsibility towards net zero carbon as well, which we'll come on to in a second. So I'm going to try and get through these slides. My first two are very boring, just to warn you in terms of text, and they do get more colourful. Don't worry, it's not going to be 25 minutes of this sort of slide. It's probably, but I couldn't think of another way of doing it. I just wanted a prompt for myself, really. So I think for me, some of this isn't rocket science, but when you mix it together as so we're pension funds, right? So we have lots of cash, can take a long-term view, which is very interesting. I've been doing my job for 3.5, 4 years now, part of this transformation. And in the middle of this transformation around all of this stuff, COVID pops in, right? So we were already on the route of saying we have to change. Landlord-tenant relationships aren't right. Like, I mean, I could talk about that one subject for about half an hour, but it blows my mind in any other industry that you could treat your customers like a landlord does, right? All the intermediaries, all the legal letters, all the ridiculousness around relationships between he said, she said, and then in offices in particular, which is a big part of us as a group here today, this he said, she said around why the building isn't working, and actually these huge organisations that spring up in the middle to try and regulate that relationship, which is, for me, very, very old school. So one of the number one things on my list when I started this job, and Bill Hughes, who's the CEO of Real Assets, was to change that fundamentally. So that's why I'm not a property manager surveyor by trade. I've got a very different view on life. We've also got the changing nature of cities and towns, and retail in particular has been massively impacted by the online revolution in e-commerce. We've obviously got flexible workspace. That was a really interesting presentation earlier on in terms of how lease lengths are a barrier. And for us, I mean, obviously when I started, you're talking about £25 billion of real estate. The valuation is a big driver for our asset managers. So trying to get someone to understand that actually lots of 3-year leases that go up over time as a premium is better than one 10-year lease that breaks in 5 years and you end up with long rent-free periods and all that sort of stuff. So it's that massive psychology shift for us in terms of how do we actually embrace much more flexible work, how do we embrace a different level of service, and that's a word I use a lot in my job. How do we provide a service, much more than bricks and mortar? Net zero carbon is a crazy challenge for us. Scope 3 emissions, like, Jesus, it's like we haven't even started the iceberg on that, and the legislation that's going to come from government, rightly for pension funds in particular, to squeeze us to say, right, what are your tenants consuming? How are you managing that? How are you squeezing it down? It's an obvious one for the government to regulate around, and it's a huge pressure for us and for me. And then the adoption of technology. We're quite famous. Like prop tech is used to cover all things, but innovation is difficult in property because I think everyone in this room would have done a pilot with a company like Infogrids, a good example. We've got a pilot with Infogrid, right? But how do you scale that across hundreds of buildings? How do you have a real impact in terms of using technology to change the game? So that's really what I want to talk to you about, really. We've probably done, I've put into 3 categories of response to all of that stuff that's going on. And new products and services and skills is probably a language. So for me, I'm a new set of skills that a landlord wouldn't traditionally have. There's a couple of my colleagues that we've brought in the last few years, people that are specialists around technology, people that are specialists around like visionary creative piece. Like the guy that runs our retail sector is an architect by trade. So it just changes, I'll show you some slides on that in a minute, it just changes the way we think about things. And actually as a landlord, trying to think about product and service is a big leap in terms of how we think about how we're going to make money over the long and make returns, particularly as a pension fund, which is obviously a big driver. The second one is a presentation in its own right. So the Mercury model was something we did to try and alleviate the pressure around property managers in particular. So your JLLs, your Savills, your Workmans, expected to know the technical ins and outs of buildings plus the nth degree of a lease. So we broke that apart in two, and we've put a facilities management platform in place, which is an equal to our property managers, so they have to work together. So we work with Bellrock, we have about 42 facilities management professionals across the UK, and they have to work in this really interesting triangle, as I call it, between the asset manager, our side, who has to take more responsibility for operations, and the property manager who's really driving that financial lease-based relationship. And that's been in place for nearly 3 years now. It's been fantastic. So our Net Promoter Score went from -24 in offices to 0. I'm really proud of that. I mean, we're stuck at 0, but I mean, we are a landlord at the end of the day. This is a long-term job, but I like the fact we measure it. I like the fact we take it seriously. We also have QR codes in all our office buildings now where you can give us instant feedback and give us a score out of 5, which we then make so it's like a pulse Net Promoter Score. And the culture that's created around our team, so obviously I'm on every one of those emails, and then you've got people sort of like just ping back and say, right, I know that's a problem, we're on it, we've raised this order, we're doing this. So that culture to be customer-centric, I think, is really coming through in our buildings now, which is really exciting. And then the digital strategy. To do this stuff at scale, you have to use technology. So that's where I really want to focus my presentation on today, and then hopefully we can get some questions around that. So on to the first one. I think it's quite a visual start, really, in terms of what it means to be a landlord now. And Den's, as I mentioned before, he's an architect by trade. He's been in the business for a couple of years. He's got this phrase about turning from being a librarian to an editor. I just really like that. So this whole concept that you're just giving someone, they sign the lease, you give them the keys, be it a retail unit, industrial unit, or an office space, and you say, right, I'll see you in 5 years for the re-gear. That can't happen anymore. You've got to create an environment that people want to be in. I really take from that Flex presentation earlier, I agree with that. We as a landlord, or property owners we like to call ourselves, have to be part of that puzzle of making it a great place to be, which I've got more onto later. But on the retail space, there's some really interesting ideas here. Nothing particularly rocket science, but markets giving SMEs free spaces so they can market their wares. Lo and behold, 2 or 3 of them will take full leases over time. That's been proven. Kingsland in Poole, which I'll come to in a second. Foundry is a bit of our take on co-working, but in a retail space. So it's like micro retail. It's co-working spaces in shopping centres on build-to-rent environments, normally underrepresented by co-working. Market is, Gather is a free space we give to the community for people to do whatever they want. And they just launched it in Dundee, actually, and they had 150 requests from local central enterprises, the council, just to use a box, basically. I mean, none of this is particularly rocket science, but we'd never done it before. And the impact for us has been quite impactful. So we were massively falling out with Poole. So this transitional landlord thing, like, even worse, where we own these huge shopping areas. The council, I'll be honest with you, we're in litigation with us. They were not happy with the things we were doing. This is the state of one of the streets. Pretty depressing. We're a bit loggerheads with them. With a bit of vision and a bit of innovation, we've turned it into what's now called Kingland, 10 units, 10 new businesses that started there. 2 of them have gone on to be massively successful. 1 of them did fold, but that was not really their fault. COVID sort of took their wind out of their sails, unfortunately. But it's created a buzz, and suddenly Poole Council like us, and we're redeveloping this place together, and it's a partnership, right? So, but that's just a bit of imagination. It didn't cost the fund a lot of money. Yes, they have to give these guys rent-free for 6 months or 12 months to see the business, but what you're doing is you're creating vibrancy, you're creating footfall. You're talking about these centres in a completely different way than people would traditionally. And then in offices, we've had to rethink offices. Like, people don't buy really 20, 30, 40,000 square foot space anymore. I think, again, that presentation earlier on was spot on. We have to make ourselves really easy for organisations to plug into. And we also, within offices, we need to start building a loyalty. Yeah, it amazes me. I use that comparison to other industries. Because we've got so many intermediaries between us and corporate occupiers, we can't do cool stuff. We've just built, HMRC, 10 brilliant buildings across the UK as their hubs, right? £100 million each, right? That's our capital, long-term lease, reasonably low indexation, if you like, but a good return for a pension fund, right? It doesn't have to be dramatic because they can take a long-term view. What have HMRC got? Some of the best buildings in the UK, on track to hit their net zero carbon targets. Why can't we do that with other occupiers? Why do we have to be in this cat and mouse game of, I'm going to go and see these 14 buildings and I'm going to make a decision based on some very basic metrics? We have to up the game as landlords in trying to build relationships, giving better data about how spaces perform, and then deliver against that. And then I think that drives loyalty. Then that gets to the point where we've got a couple of really nice examples, businesses that have taken space and they've just grown exponentially. Then they say, right, L&G, what have you got for us? Yeah, that's the drive and the brand that we've really got to build behind. Managed service was touched on earlier. We couldn't really do that in our old setup. We didn't really trust our partners to deliver that. It's hard. Once you start saying, I'm going to deliver your service, you're getting into people's space. You've got to be much more confident you can deliver an outcome, otherwise you're going to fall out. So with our new Mercury model, we felt we could do that. And now we've got managed service customers. Our biggest one that we've done, which is about 20,000 square foot in Staines, starts next Monday. And that was really exciting. That was a company that said, look, love the product, fully fitted, we can move straight in with a few tweaks and changes, and you're going to provide all the services, easy. And they pay a premium for that, right? It's a shorter lease length, it's 3 years rather than 10 like we might have wanted in the past, but it's a premium rent, and they're not going to leave, right? If we provide a good service, your staff love it, in this day and age, I just don't think you move on. And I'm really excited as well. We've got a lot of HR people here today. I really enjoyed those sessions because I think that's the key to what we're seeing now is more HR people going out on lettings, traditional lettings walks, getting involved in decisions of where we put people and why we put them in that space and what that means for the business strategy. That's brilliant. But it's hard for landlords to respond to that, if I'm honest. It's taken us a long time, let's say 3.5 years to get to this point, and I don't even think we're there yet. But I wanted to share, I think it's really interesting building on some of that Infogrids stuff. I mean, that is a terrible slide. I did think that when I was putting these together, but I'm going to talk to it anyway. So one of my reasons why I wanted to take this job, and I said this pre-COVID, I've been talking about air quality. Debs will back me up on this for about 8 years, right? So back in my mighty days, I've been talking about air quality, but because it was nice to have. No one did anything about it. Since COVID, oh my goodness, right? It is not an option anymore. Everyone understands that humidity spreads germs. Everyone understands that bad ventilation, CO2 is a proxy for that. We don't want to be in spaces in close proximity to people wondering what germs and diseases we're going to pick up. So you have to start demonstrating that space. Now, this is where I think it gets really interesting. So you look at a lot of occupiers, certainly smaller ones that don't have huge FM teams. How can they provide those conditions when they're in a log jam with a landlord who provides a central plant? They haven't got control of the AHUs. They probably haven't got control of all the parameters and the BMS to make that happen. We have. So we have to be bolder and saying we will provide an outcome for your organisation and we will understand that data and we will fire it back to you in a way you can share it to your staff. So we call it Symphony. That's our smart buildings wrap. But really what that is as well is a process, and it's taken me a long time to get to this point. But effectively we use a lot of smart tech, demand logic, Airthings, shepherd these businesses there to get data out of buildings. But it's around 3 key areas: energy data, air quality data at the point it's being consumed in occupied spaces, and then maintenance data from like things like lifts and conditions. So you don't have to have like lots of really sexy smart buildings. It can just be sensors plugged onto plant. No rocket science there. We then take that through. We've set up some rules and alerts through the Concerta system in Bellrock. But the bit that I'm really proud of and I think is really helping with our occupiers is we've partnered with Air-Rated. Anybody heard of Air-Rated? Yeah, business started about 3 years ago, just before the pandemic. Beautiful timing. And they are a certification around air. So you might think, oh, well, we've got Fitwell and we've got Well Building Standard. They're very expensive, quite high intensity accreditations if anyone's actually gone through one. Whereas what we like about Air-Rated is it's a very simple, matter of fact, look at temperature, humidity, CO2, VOCs, and it says, right, this is what good looks like. Actually, if you want to be really good, you're getting towards platinum, but actually, if you just want to be certified, that's fine, but at least you can show your staff this is a good space to be in. So we've actually really backed that. We've got 22 buildings certified in the UK. I think 2 of them are platinum, about 7 or 8 are gold, and others are in that silver certified category. But we tell tenants that. We say, look, either this is great space in terms of the building, or we say we need to work together to improve it. And that is the absolute magic I've seen in the last 6 months that we've been doing this, right? I go and see tenants and say, right, let's work together in your space. We'll put the sensors in. You get a monthly air score, not just an annual certification, a monthly air score that says, this is a great space to be in, or not. Because sometimes it's the fit out, we all know that, right? It's not always the landlord, it's normally a joint game. But all these conversations we've had across the UK around this, it's not about landlord, tenant, traditional, let's have a fight about it. It's been, right, the data says this, let's try that. Okay, go away, come back next month, did it work? No, right, let's try that. And then the beauty of that is you can spin it around to your staff and you can say, this is actually a really good space to work from a health perspective. So I'm really pleased with that. I think it does break down some of the barriers between landlord and tenant. We've got that in, Symphony's in 8 buildings live now. We've got, I was just looking at it, we've got 10 monthly air scores going to tenants this month. So we're starting to scale this up and actually deliver it across the UK. And then my final thing I want to talk to you about, which is my baby, is Vista. This is a bit random, so I don't know why I like to test it with people. So this is, when you think about buildings, and there's 2 things that normally happen with occupier engagement. This has come about from the fact that going back to my point at the beginning, we don't really have direct relationships with our occupiers. And then when you talk about occupier engagement, we often get into building users, right? So I've got an app on my phone that tells me I can get through that gate, I can get this for lunch, I can get this discount, which is great. I'm not decrying any of that. But what we miss is all these real estate professionals that have got to make all these decisions every day around air quality, around saving energy, around the next space requirements, downsizing, flexible work. And not everyone's got a big FM team or a lot of experience in facilities management. A lot of people, as we know, come into facilities management or property from a different background. HR people, as I said before, for the first time have remit around property. So how do you give people that support and access to data and things that actually help you drive that real estate journey? So that move to a service partner that you'd expect to see in other business markets, as I said. So this is a bit, at the moment, like a cross between LinkedIn and online banking. And the analogy I use is, you wouldn't give your money to a bank now where you didn't have an online portal, would you? So why do you pay us millions of pounds of rent a year and you've got no idea what the energy consumption is, you've got no idea what your debt position is, you've got no idea how the space is performing, you've got no access to any tools to make you get the best out of it? Why would you do that? Well, that's just because we've had 50 years of real estate which says you have to pay under the lease. So what we're saying here is we want to be more transparent. So this is Vista by L&G. It's a reference tool. It allows you to see your property team. It gives you financial sustainability data. It gives you building documents. None of that's rocket science, right? But you wouldn't believe how little that is done. Like when you actually talk to, and I'm seeing a few nods, when I go and talk to occupiers, they're like, well, actually, that's amazing, because now I've got to email JLL or Savills, I've got to chase 4 property managers. As soon as you talk to Sainsbury's that have got like 10 leases with us, or Next is a good example, 22 leases with us, absolute chaos. We've got JLL, Savills, Workman. Who do I go to for documents? Who do I go to for a proper conversation about my portfolio? So this doesn't matter which fund you're in, doesn't matter which managing your agent in, you're getting your data presented to you by L&G. And then we're moving it as a community integrator. Now this is the bit that gets me really excited, and then slightly a byproduct of innovation, right? This isn't what I set out to achieve. But it was quite cool, because I was on an industrial estate in Newcastle, and the guy said to me, there's 40 units here, Mark, and a couple of us know each other, but we never talk, we never have tenant meetings, we've got no idea what your plans are, we've got loads of ideas for the park, and also, we'd really like to work with some local businesses to get recommendations from each other. I was like, oh my God, right, bingo. So we've basically created Facebook for industrial parks now and shopping centres, where you can log in and it's just your space. So it's just those 40 tenants, ring-fenced there, and like, we call it neighbourhood wall. You can have a chat with your property manager, you can have a chat with each other, you can recommend businesses, you can vote on things, like we're thinking of doing this, would you think it's a great idea? And then we've got this thing called local marketplace, and this is where we've got this massive commitment around social value, which I love with working in L&G, where we want businesses to create businesses of us. We call it inclusive capitalism. I've got a great example in Nottingham where it's all completely by luck. This social enterprise, cleaner business, I was talking to him and he said, oh, I can only work within Nottingham. So I was like, oh, great, what have we got in Nottingham? Oh, we've got an industrial estate called Robin Hood. He goes, I've already got a client there. I was like, oh, hallelujah. So what we're doing is we put it on the neighbourhood wall to say to the other 9 tenants, do you want to use this cleaning business, who are very good, and they're also rehabilitating ex-addicts, actually. So for me, it's become a social fabric, and you see here we've got 160 users within Bellrock and JLL and Savills and Workman. We've got 1,000 businesses. That'll be 2,500 by the end of the year. So of my 4,500, I'm suddenly getting towards 2,500 that we've got a direct B2B relationship with. And we're driving that local communication, which we don't have to control centrally. And then Vista is a business exchange. So going back to this levelling up piece, if I'm just taking my first office space, what does net zero carbon mean to me? What do I need to do? Right, so we're going to run some e-learning, we're going to run some events that allow people to share ideas, and we're going to get much more interactive around our tools. And that's where we're going, right? Personalised experience. And I was thinking about what should my last slide be, and I thought this is it, because actually it's under the banner of Vista, but as a landlord, we have to personalise. We have to respect our tenants as individual businesses that have their own growth aspirations, their own problems. We have to support them in unique ways. So Vista gives you that national backbone to get access to things you might want to do, but also a local point to really grow your business and understand what you can do in that local community. So we're just going to keep investing behind this, keep giving our tenants access to us, keep migrating processes that are a pain in the arse, like way leaves and license to water and all sorts of other licenses that I don't fully understand. But that's the reality of real estate. Unless we're going to digitalise it at scale and we push people through that and say, no, you will have a direct relationship with us, we're going to treat you like a customer, we will not get to that next generation. And fundamentally, what I say to our board is, you will not reduce Scope 3 emissions across our portfolio unless people trust you. You can't build trust with 4,500 businesses with people just dotted around the UK doing their own thing with their own priorities. You have to find a way, digitally to bring that all together, give people access on demand to stuff that really moves us along that journey. So that's just a few ideas from me in terms of what we're working on. Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you.